The wild rituals of the greater sage-grouse. In the wide, open sagebrush plains of North America, the greater sage-grouse lives a life shaped by survival, mating displays, and habitat loss. The greater sage-grouse is one of the most iconic birds of the American West, instantly recognizable for the dramatic courtship dances the greater sage-grouse performs every spring. Each year, male greater sage-grouse gather in open clearings called leks. In these leks, the male greater sage-grouse inflates two yellowish air sacs on the chest and makes strange popping and whistling sounds to impress female greater sage-grouse. The male greater sage-grouse fans out a white ruff of feathers and struts in slow motion, creating one of the most bizarre and beautiful mating rituals in the bird world. The female greater sage-grouse quietly watches from a distance, selecting the strongest and most spectacular male greater sage-grouse. Only a few male greater sage-grouse succeed in mating, while the rest are ignored. The lekking behavior of the greater sage-grouse has fascinated scientists and wildlife lovers for generations. The greater sage-grouse spends most of the year in sagebrush habitat. The greater sage-grouse feeds on sage leaves, insects, and flowers. The greater sage-grouse uses camouflage to avoid predators like coyotes, eagles, and hawks. Because the greater sage-grouse is ground-dwelling, dense sagebrush offers the greater sage-grouse both food and protection. The greater sage-grouse population has dropped significantly over the years. Habitat destruction, farming, oil drilling, and climate change have all impacted greater sage-grouse survival. Conservationists are working to protect greater sage-grouse habitats and monitor greater sage-grouse populations to prevent extinction. The greater sage-grouse is considered an indicator species, meaning the health of the greater sage-grouse reflects the health of the entire sagebrush ecosystem. If the greater sage-grouse disappears, many other plants and animals that depend on sagebrush will suffer as well. Efforts to protect the greater sage-grouse include setting aside conservation land, restoring native vegetation, and limiting industrial development in key areas. The greater sage-grouse has become a symbol of the struggle between wildlife conservation and energy expansion in the American West. The story of the greater sage-grouse is not just about a bird. It is about an entire ecosystem. The greater sage-grouse, with dramatic mating dances and deep ties to the land, stands as a reminder of nature's beauty and fragility.